Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Graduate Careers Exploration Week. I'm really excited for our panel today. We have a 2-in-1 session on careers in government and national labs. So it's going to be a really exciting conversation. We'll get to learn about exciting career options and hear about the different trajectories that each of our alumni panelists have taken in each of these areas. So welcome. So for those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Jennifer Tasneem, and I'm a career advisor here in the School of Chemical Sciences. And my role today is just to essentially facilitate this conversation. This meeting is a networking session. It's an interactive session. It's your opportunity to ask our alumni any questions that you have about each of these areas, each of these industries, and learn more from them. So I am going to actually allow you all to lead the conversation today. So think about those questions that you're going to ask our panelists. So just some housekeeping details. As I mentioned before, this session is recorded and the recording will be available later next week on our YouTube channel and also on the Media Space channel. But any questions that you have, you can use either the reactions button in the tab below and use the raise hand option to ask questions, or you can also unmute yourself to ask questions. But if you're uncomfortable doing any of those, you can also private message me your questions and ask that way. The other thing also, I'm just going to start off by giving the floor to our alumni to introduce themselves, talk about a little bit about which area they graduated from, maybe mention which labs they were in, and talk briefly about your current role in each of your organizations. So Anne-Marie, since you joined first, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Anne-Marie. I graduated in December 2021 from Andrew Gorth's lab in chemistry. Right now, I work as a technology manager for the Department of Energy, and I've been in that role since November. But right before that, I was a fellow working in the same office, sort of doing similar work, but sort of transferred up into a more permanent federal position. My day-to-day life is managing projects, writing funding opportunities, reviewing proposals, and a lot of admin stuff. I get to watch people do science from people like Jose and Nikola, but I don't do it myself, which is what I didn't want to be in the lab anymore. I'll pass it to Nikola.
All right, thanks, Anne-Marie. Yeah, my name is Nikola Dudukovic. I graduated from the Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering Department in 2015. And then I joined Lawrence Livermore as a postdoc and then converted afterwards to full-time staff. Lawrence Livermore is one of, I think, 17 Department of Energy labs, and each one differs in a certain way. Generally speaking, our mission is to apply cutting-edge science and technology to maintain and strengthen national security, and that means lots of different mission areas, ranging from energy and climate initiatives to biosecurity to defense to space, et cetera. And all of this information you can go and research online. My point is, it's a big place. I think we're over 8,000 employees now. The main campus is 1 square mile, plus we have some additional sites as well. And so it's a big place, it's a big organization. We sort of have three main, we have three main kind of scientific organizations, which is engineering, where I sit, physical and life sciences, and then computing, and then three main mission focus area, one being the National Ignition Facility, or NIF, which is what's kind of shown here, and you've probably seen some news about that in the past couple of months. So that's NIF is one, and then we have global security, which covers a whole lot of space, and we'll go into detail again. You can look it up, and then we have a weapons directorate. And so then those directorates split into divisions, and divisions split into sections, and sections split into groups, and it's a huge organization. And so where I sit is in the Center for Engineered Materials and Manufacturing. So that's kind of a wide spanning sort of umbrella group that deals primarily with additive manufacturing or 3D printing, and innovations in that field. And that can range from design and optimization of new materials or metamaterials, developing new additive manufacturing processes, developing new feedstocks for these processes, doing modeling and validation. It's sort of a holistic approach, and it's it really is a big interdisciplinary group that works together in developing these. And so what I sort of do on a day-to-day basis can change and has changed over my career. So when I first started as a postdoc, I was very much in the lab, hands-on, doing experimental stuff. And then started getting involved in other projects, leading some projects or leading certain aspects of larger projects. And so right now I'm sort of more in a big picture kind of space, design of experiments and formulating problems, et cetera, leading smaller teams, but also stuff that you would normally do in academia as well, writing proposals, writing papers, publishing patents as well, presenting at conferences, and so on. And then I think probably everybody else on the panel will agree that a lot of my day that gets taken up by meetings and emails too, to be perfectly honest, but that just kind of comes with it.
Awesome. Jose, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Howdy, friends. My name is Jose Zavala. I completed my PhD from U of I in 2020. Sorry, no. Man, put a blur. I think it was 2020. And in the midst of COVID. And then I did a brief postdoc at U of I, and then went to work at Oak Ridge National Lab. And now I'm currently at SLAC, which is pictured here behind me. And I actually, similar to Emery, I don't do science anymore, but I do help other scientists with, like Nikola said, patents, copyrights. I work in technology transfer here at the lab. I'll tell you all about it in a little bit, but very high level, my role is to help scientists with intellectual property protection and also with licensing that IP out of the lab and with bringing external collaborators into the lab to create IP. And I'll pass it over to Jason.
Thank you, Jose. My name is Jason Rodriguez, and I actually, it seems like just yesterday I finished, but it also seems so long ago at the same time. but I finished in 2009 there. I was in Jim Lizzie's lab. I think Jim retired from academia maybe like in 2011 or 2012. So if you came after that, I mean, the lab was completely retired by then. But yes, I'm a physical chemist by training and a spectroscopist. That was the group that we would do there at U of I with gas phase spectroscopy. I have been at FDA my entire career in different roles. I left U of I in 2009 during the Great Recession, right? So not too different economically than maybe some of the times that we're emerging from right now. There was a lot of uncertainty in those years in 2008 and 2009 when, mysteriously the visits on campus and on-campus interviews, those became a little bit rarer. In April 2009, I was, just walking around CLSL in the department and saw a posting for an FDA postdoc position in St. Louis. So I've been in St. Louis since then. when my wife and I moved to St. Louis from U of I, it was a little bit surprising going, from really flat Champaign-Urbana to more hilly. There's more scenery here in St. Louis, but we were thankful to stay in the Midwest at the time, but we weren't sure we would stay here very long, right? I mean, at that time, you're kind of in survival, trying to get whatever job you can. But as the years went by, I transitioned from a postdoctoral fellow in FDA that's administered through the ORISE program, Oak Ridge program, you might hear it as well. A lot of the federal offices do postdoctoral fellowships through that program, and FDA is no different. Once I was able to transition to full-time employment, I was a chemist and was able to apply really some of the background that I got at U of I, being a physical chemist, more in the analytical chemistry realm, but also as life has it, right? You learn different things along the way. And so I picked up chemometrics, it's something that you might be exposed to as well, modeling, multivariate modeling as well, and really build a research program. Probably about 5 years into my career at FDA, I started leading a group. I started hiring my own postdocs. And then in about 2017 or so, I transitioned to supervision in the federal workforce. And I think that one of the unique things that FDA has, at least in our lab in St. Louis, which is actually a headquarter level lab, but it's out in St. Louis instead of Maryland, where most of the other FDA labs are, the Washington, D.C. area, is we're able to really work on a lot of scientific problems and use our expertise and bring in expertise through contractors, postdocs, and new hires. So in management, one of the things I've always been very happy to do is hire U of I students and give opportunities like those that were afforded me. Now in my present role since 2020, I'm a division director for one of the labs that we have here in St. Louis. We split from one big division to two smaller divisions. So I lead about a staff of about 30 people, about 22, 23 full-time employees. The rest are postdocs and contractors. But the work that we do, I don't do the hands-on science anymore, but I'm very much still involved in it, because that's one of the things that in the job that I currently have is a really nice aspect. So I deal with these scientific problems. I try to help propose what's a timely solution. I mean, one of the things that over the COVID years that we had to deal with, for example, is the hand sanitizers. Remember when everybody was coming up with a new hand sanitizer you may not have seen before? Our lab used different technologies to screen and test and remove some of those products from the market that maybe use ethanol, for example, that wasn't pharmaceutical grade, because pharmaceutical grade and consumer grade, those make a big difference than if you're using ethanol that's more for a manufacturing or solvent grade as well. But one of the things that I've always found in my career is that there's always a new challenge, and I think that all of us in government kind of know that there is maybe the drudgery of the bureaucracy, and as Nikola mentioned, the emails and meetings you have to go to. But there's also an exciting aspect of having a career where that you're directly influencing some of the patient health and their lives. In my case, I only work with pharmaceutical side. FDA does have a drug side, a food side, a veterinary medicine side, and inspections and an inspectorate side that includes all the others. But we can unroll some of those things if you have questions. But I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. And I look forward to answering questions along with my co-panelists here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for your introductions. So for students, start thinking about and ask your questions. I guess there's a question already in the chat, but I also wanted to mention this is a networking opportunity. So if you're able to, I mentioned in the chat before, if you're able to turn on your cameras, please do so. I'm sure the alums would love to see your faces as opposed to speaking to names on a blank screen. So the first question that was in the chat, could you discuss general differences between working as a postdoc or scientist in a national lab versus academia or industry? So maybe Nikola, you could take this.
Sure. So I think there's definitely similarities and differences. We see plenty of PhD graduates that come in to do a postdoc and then stay, and then some of them will convert to full-time staff like I did. And then some of them will go on back to academia and pursue professorships, or sometimes they'll go into industry. And so I think that that would be kind of like the most fundamental difference career-wise, is that you're really sort of never limiting your options to one of those paths. So you kind of, what I really like about a national lab postdoc, and which is why I pursued one, was that you are really kind of leaving all of your doors open in a way. So that would be one thing I can think of. The second thing is that you might, this can depend on your area, but you might find that the research at national labs may be slightly more applied and slightly less fundamental. I think that would be a difference between academic and national lab research. And then the third thing is that, and I can't claim this for sure, but I'm pretty sure you get paid more on average. I think financially speaking, national lab postdocs are better from that angle. But again, I'm basing this on very few data points, so don't take my word for it. Those are the main differences that I can think of right off the bat.
Yeah, from a career services standpoint, I can definitely agree to the last point that you mentioned. Salary-wise, national labs are better compensated than academic positions. Awesome. What other questions do we have from students and postdocs who are here today? Jack, you have a question?
Hi. I was wondering, at your respective national labs, how common is it for postdocs to get hired on for staff positions afterwards?
I can answer for, at Livermore, we have a pretty high conversion rate. So it's, I think, typically greater than 50%. It also sort of depends on which organization you're in and sort of what field and project you're in. I think there's, I think there's a pretty high likelihood, if somebody is a good fit and does good work, the lab always wants to retain, good scientists and researchers and engineers, et cetera. And so I think a lot of the postdocs that don't get converted, a lot of them just choose to leave and pursue, again, a professorship or some other type of career. I don't personally know of anybody who really wanted to stay on, but then didn't get hired because of poor performance. I think we kind of, I think pretty much everybody that gets hired as a postdoc, we get really good quality candidates. And so, so I think if you are interested in staying on full time, you have a very good chance. I would just caution you to start thinking about it early. If you do join as a postdoc, you want to communicate that to your supervisor, your team, your project leaders. Make them aware that you like where you're at, that you want to stay there, and there's always work.
I think to add on what Nikola has said as well, being how a lot of these postdocs positions are, I think that you should kind of see it as not only are you feeling out the organization, but the organization is also kind of seeing how you fit. But I agree that for candidates that fit well, it's pretty obvious. And there's a lot of opportunities there to grow. I know in FDA, we typically limit ORISE fellows, which is what we call our postdocs. So I might use ORISE fellows, I might call it postdocs, but they're postdoctoral positions. We like to limit it probably to about 2 years. And I think that because by 2 years or so, I can't say that we've never had some longer than 2 years, but by 2 years or so, really both sides have really felt out whether it's going to be a fit, and if the partnership between the organization and the postdoc is beneficial. I think also as postdocs, you should also try to communicate with your mentor or your supervisor or whatever they're called in that organization, of your desire, for example, to want to stay, to want to grow. And conversely, if it's something where you think that there might be red flags or something where the fit's not good, also don't be shy in having to wait 2 years to find a better opportunity, because early on, the trajectory that you're on will really affect how your career progresses in those early years. And don't be shy if the fit's not quite right. I know that when I joined FDA, it was a time of transition. The organization, I remember being a new PhD and working with a bunch of scientists that had been there for 25, 30 years. I mean, there's not a lot of things in common that you have when you're the rookie, so to speak, working with, such seasoned employees. But after a few years, there's movement, people retire, people move on. I've noticed in the workforce too, the old adage that you're going to work in government your whole life because of the benefits and all that, it doesn't always happen. I've seen a lot of people leave, early in their career too. So you prepare yourself with those early years and feeling out and seeing how things progress. But I think that the federal government does have really nice postdoctoral programs at each of our organizations. So, that's how I feel about it.
I'll just chime in super quick on that note as well. Yeah, the labs are case by case, but I've heard typically you'll renew your postdoc contract for on a per year basis for up to 2 or 3 years. It seems like people kind of have an idea of whether they want to become staff there or kind of use a postdoc as a jumping off point. So that's kind of what I've heard from a couple different labs.
Awesome. So
If I can just add one more thing, which again, I'm speaking for Livermore, but I'm pretty sure that most of the national labs have a similar approach, and that maybe goes a little bit back to the previous question as well, which is that when you get hired as a postdoc, your salary, 75% of your salary is funded by a project or multiple projects that you are in fact hired on to work on, and then you have what's called a postdoc professional development time or something like that. So 25% of your time, meaning 25% of your funding, is meant for you to do things like write papers, travel to conferences, attend workshops, get more training and stuff like that. So it's kind of built into it, and gives you the opportunity to grow. You can't do your own research. That's the one thing you can't do. So it's not meant for research, but it's meant for basically everything else. And so it also helps you. So you have 2 or 3 years to grow and kind of figure out what you want, or if you know what you want, help get the skills and the knowledge that you need to take that next step, whatever that may be, whether within a national lab or outside.
Thank you.
Right. So before we jump into the questions in the chat, I know you all briefly mentioned a little bit about your roles, but could you give us a more detailed overview about what each of your role entails, what types of projects maybe you do work on, and things that you do?
I can go first. I should have said before, but I work for the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office, which is one office within an office called Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which is within a branch of DOE, which is like government is many levels, and it's great and complicated and fun. Also you have two different titles, which is great and weird. So I'm a physical scientist because I have a chemistry degree, but I'm a technology manager is like my sort of functional role. Like, what do I do every day? And technology manager's job is to manage projects that we give funding for out of funding opportunities. There are lots of different kinds of funding opportunities, and that funding can go to national labs and it goes to academia and industry. And so you have some mix of all of those projects at various different sizes. And so you do things like meet with project teams for updates, you review their invoices, you make sure they're meeting their milestones, you help adjust their milestones, if things come up. And that's sort of the main part of the job, but there's also the writing of the funding opportunities. So how are we getting money out the door? And what sorts of things are we putting that money toward? And there's a little bit of, the hand of government telling you what to put funding toward, but also what you're thinking about is as being most impactful. And so there's a lot of sort of minute decision making that has like a really big impact in what ends up happening, but over the course of like a tedium of meetings, making those kinds of decisions. A lot of my day is meetings because it's a lot of management. There are days where it's just my 8 to 5 is just one long block of meetings. And then there are other days where I have nothing to do except do all the work that I talked about in all those meetings. There's one other thing that I was going to say. Oh, I do a lot of collaborative work, almost exclusively. I don't do anything by myself, basically ever. So there's nothing that I'm like, this is mine, and no one else has thought or touched it. Everything is a collaborative effort. So it's a little bit of an adjustment going from grad school where like you had a project that maybe you worked with people on, but there are parts of it at least that you're the one who came up with the experiment, did the experiment, wrote about it. And it's all you and no one else had an influence, but that's everything here is reviewed by like 4 or 5 other people before it goes anywhere, even to someone else in your own office. So there's a lot of like managing other people and working with them and stuff. But you also get to do fun things like going to like a high school robotics competition and giving out an award this weekend. So that's like cool and fun and exciting. Yeah. I think that was the question. I think I answered it.
Yeah, you did. Nikola, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think I kind of hinted at a bit of what I do in my introduction. But I'll kind of talk about maybe a bit more about some of the projects that I'm on. And so when I first started as a postdoc, I was working on a project that where we were developing ways to 3D print glass optics. And that's kind of why I got hired, because my background was in rheology, and I came from a group from Chip Zukowski's group, who's no longer at Illinois, but he's a very big name in rheology, and basically 3D printing is kind of like working with goopy things and how soft things deform and flow. That's rheology, and that's essentially what you're doing with 3D printing. And so it was kind of happenstance that I was the perfect fit for what the team was looking for on this new project. And so, like I said, it was kind of very hands-on experimental work developing these materials. And then from there, I got into what we call micro-architected materials. So what that means is having essentially lattices of unit cells that are tessellated across space, and by designing those architectures, you get materials with tunable properties, and even properties that you cannot achieve in some bulk materials. And I mean, I actually kind of have some samples here always laying around. So things like this, right? Kind of ordered, very lightweight, porous structures, but you can tune the mechanical properties, the optical properties, the thermal properties, et cetera. So, so what do we do with these? So right now, we are one of the projects that I remain heavily involved with is printing, if you will, these very porous micro-architected materials and using them to control fluids through capillary action. So if you think of a sponge and you like soak up a sponge or a paper towel, right, and you get capillary wicking of water inside it. What if you could design very precisely and 3D print what that sponge looks like, and what can you do with that, and how can you use this control over fluids, and specifically for things like electrochemical reactors for CO2 reduction, or carbon capture from air. And things like that. So that's sort of where most of my work is focused in right now, is CO2 capture and reduction, and developing these materials, and kind of devising new reactor and device designs for these things. So that's sort of the scientific portion of what I do. But then I also, write proposals, publish papers, etc. So I should actually preface everything that I'm saying with that, is that I kind of tend to work more in a more sort of fundamental R&D portion of the lab. So my work is less mission specific and program driven. And it's more on the kind of fundamental core S&T development. And so I have the actual work, and then we're always thinking about what's next. And much like Anne-Marie said, everything is happening in teams. I have things that I work on myself, but everything is very team driven. Everybody's always working together, and that's how the whole lab is organized. So those skills are very important. And then I do a lot of kind of additional things, which is I sit on some committees for evaluating new proposals. I try to do as many outreach opportunities that I can. So I was telling Jennifer that, in 2019, I actually came back to campus for the first time for an in-person recruiting fair. We also sometimes recruit at different conferences. So yeah, and I'll also often go through resumes, interview, hire, mentor both student interns and new postdocs. And yeah, it gets, you get to do a lot of things. And the challenge is always that there's not enough time to accomplish everything. So you have to be judicious in how thin you can spread yourself before you find yourself overwhelmed. But there's a lot of opportunities for things that are more about changing and influencing the culture, involvement with outside organizations, outreach opportunities, etc. So all of that is part of my daily life.
Awesome. Jose, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what I do, I think that's the question that we're on. What I do briefly is pretty much three things. So I help our folks with intellectual property protection, and that also includes a bunch of different kinds of contracts. So bring money in contracts like strategic partnership projects or cooperative research and development agreements, or IP protection things like non-disclosure agreements. And a lot of the time it's a lot of relationship management. So for example, and this is kind of prevalent in academia as well as national labs, a lot of the times our science first folks, all of our PIs, can sometimes be a bit quick to sign NDAs or anything that a private company sends over to them, and we have to help protect them from doing things like that. So I do a lot of reviewing NDAs and kind of explaining the importance of NDAs being legally binding contracts and why we can't sign on to certain clauses. I do a lot of connecting our PIs with pretty much interfacing between our PIs and our legal folks to make sure everybody's, not running into situations where they're going to enter into a conflict of interest, for example, and that kind of compliance related things. But I also do what I think are really fun things, like hosting companies, large energy companies, as they come visit SLAC, and introducing them to a lot of our PIs that should be speaking with them. It could potentially strike up a collaboration with them. A lot of knowing who's doing what around campus, and making introductions. I think that's a ton of fun. And I think that's, my contribution to having an impact in the real world and the scientific world and all that jazz. So that's one side of things, intellectual property protection internally. The other side is external engagement, and that looks like licensing. So for lack of a better word, or selling our patents and copyrights, but not exactly selling, licensing the rights to use them. There's some of that. And also bringing in, I guess, like I said a minute ago, bringing in people from venture capital firms across the street from SLAC, for example, or around the Bay Area, or from even further away, to speak with our folks and strike up potential collaborations. So a lot of meetings, a lot of emails that help the science become possible. It's pretty much what I do. Happy to talk about it more, but I'll just give you that overview for now and hand it over to Jason.
Thanks. And I had also described a little bit about what I do in the intro, but I can expound on it a little bit. One of the really nice things about working at FDA is I've really seen, probably over the last decade, a big culture shift of being primarily a lab where you might think that you're going to do the same thing every day, which is a lab that, we still have the things that we have to do. We sometimes call that, testing. For example, we might get a consumer complaint or need a consultation on a new drug application that's come in, and we might have to just follow a procedure or a method. Okay, so there is that component. But also, there is a lot of opportunity for scientists to grow and stay at the forefront of technology, because one of the things that's very important in being a federal agency is looking at and staying current with the technologies. So I'd say for the last decade or so, we make millions of dollars of investment in buying new technologies. So for example, the division I lead, we do a lot of high resolution mass spectrometric studies. We have the latest instruments out there for those. We do a lot of imaging technologies. We're talking about like an AFM we just bought last year, an SEM, an IR microscope. Those are the kind of things that we do. And they're probably a little bit different than we have in academics. I remember my mass spec, my triple quad in the gas phase research was a home built instrument. So we don't really build instruments in the government. What we mostly do is we buy them off the shelf from, common vendors. And, these are millions of dollars of instrumentation, but they're also used to really transform regulatory science. And so one of the things that we've been doing in our lab for the last probably 5 or 6 years now, maybe 2018, so that's 5 years ago, you might have heard about nitrosamines being detected in some drugs. So there's valsartan, which is a drug that's used a lot on a daily basis from some patients that have, cardiovascular issues. But there's also like an acid reducer, there was a Zantac, ranitidine, a lot of testing that you might have seen in the news, around 2019, 2020. Those are things that my lab has looked into, has tested. And one of the things that has been one of the most, rewarding things. I remember one time I was on a plane, and this was probably on personal leave. We call it personal leave when we take vacation. And I saw an article that was in popular media, maybe CNN or one of these, that showed the real-time impact of some of the testing work that we've done in our lab. So that was something like, wow, what you do really makes an impact. Now, I knew about this many weeks before the public knew about it, but still it's very rewarding to see your work actually make a difference to try to enhance public health. Other things that you might have questions about, for example, we do have programs where you don't necessarily apply for NIH grants or NSF grants, but we have internal funding that you apply for in the same way. As your career progresses, you'll see that once you get your first one and you're able to get a reputation and a firm basis, you're much more competitive for future funding opportunities. Your funding opportunities afford you the ability to build a research program, but you're not necessarily ever going to look into the basic science of it. You're going to look more at the applied science and really be charged to solving a problem that's within the mission relevant realm to the office that you're in the federal government. But you're able to publish, you're able to present. I've been able to travel across the world. I was just in South Korea a couple of months ago with some of the things that I do for the International Conference of Harmonization. So that's a conference where we work with industry, other government entities, and regulators to try to come to one harmonized document on certain aspects of pharmaceutical science. So there's a lot of different opportunities. It's different from academics, right? You don't have a lot of that freedom, but if you can grow within that space, you'll find that a very rewarding career with a lot of the same benefits. So I kind of always see the government postdoc, at least as far as like a federal agency goes, to being a kind of a hybrid of an industry or an academic world. So, but it's a very rewarding experience as well.
Awesome. Thank you all for that overview of each of your roles in your organizations. So we'll get to the questions in the chat. One of the ones that was asked is, could you tell us a little bit about opportunities available for international students as a postdoc or scientist, if you're familiar with that?
I'll go first since I maybe have the strictest regulations. You can't be a federal employee at the Department of Energy if you are not a US citizen, but you can do a fellowship. It's sort of it's like a postdoc. It's what I did right out of my PhD program, and I'm gonna paste the link in the chat to where those opportunities are. This website is also basically the posting for any fellowship through sort of a federal entity. It was the same sort of ORISE fellowship that Jason was mentioning earlier. This is also the same place where I got an internship that I did during my PhD. So there's both like opportunities for people who are not haven't graduated yet, but also for people who have. The Hydrogen Shot Fellowship, which is listed on here, is currently open for applications. So, and that's the one that I did not too long ago. I'll also put in the chat the links to other federal employment for US citizens positions, of which there are some that are open right now for like recent graduates. And I can talk more about like grade levels and government nonsense in a second. But that's the long and short.
Yeah, and I think what Anne-Marie said is we use this, I put that in the comments, we use this intellect site too for that program in FDA. Usually I'll say you have to be within 5 years of your last academic experience. And that may seem stringent, but it's actually better for the program, it's better for the fellow, because then you're not doing a postdoc when you're 10 years in, right? Because that's not really that appropriate, but that's generally the case. I will say though, and I'm by no means, I will preface this by I'm no expert with regarding like visas and all this other stuff, but I think that many of the people that we hire as postdocs, they are usually on OPT, but it is something that if you have a specific question, I'd reach out to whoever's the person in charge of the Zintellect posting, because there are a lot of different intricacies with regarding all those rules. So, and I'm not an expert. I don't want to misstate or misrepresent anything.
It does in the Zintellect profile. It usually says citizenships requirements, like a nuclear security admin position through Zintellect is US citizen only, but other ones are not. So it'll say.
I'll drop a quick note in here. So the national labs, most of the national labs, I think except for one, are operated by a management and operation contractor. It's a shell company that's set up to run the lab. And so they'll have the opportunity to hire folks to work on there that are international, but they might come with some strings attached. So Oak Ridge, for example, does have some secret clearance buildings. And so you'll see like people with 3 different types of badges. There may be more, but I saw 3. There were a green badge for US citizens that'll get you into so many buildings. Blue badge, if you have Q clearance, you can get into the secret building. That's cool, I guess. And then a red badge if you're a non-US citizen, and that comes with restrictions as well. I imagine Nikola probably has something similar like that, and he can elaborate a lot more than I can.
Sure. Lawrence Livermore specifically is one of 3 national security labs, along with Los Alamos and Sandia. What that means is we have a lot more sort of these mission-driven, weapon-oriented programs that are classified and require a security clearance if you want to work on it. That being said, it's not a prerequisite. We have plenty of foreign nationals that have worked at the lab for decades, and they simply work on the, again, kind of more core S&T side of things, but it can still, apply for proposals, apply for funding from different agencies, and have, very fruitful careers. It does, however, in our case, it does limit the amount of work that you can get access to, right? So it sort of slims down your chances of finding funding. But we regularly interview and hire foreign nationals, and they work on a number of things and are very successful. And so it's definitely not a disqualifier. And just whenever you're looking at job postings, it will be very clearly stated whether or not the position requires the applicant to be a U.S. citizen or not. So that's how you would kind of filter out what you're looking for. But yeah, by no means should you be discouraged by this. Like I said, plenty of people long and fruitful careers. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that response. The next question, I know some of you already answered it in the chat a little bit. Lauren asked, what techniques or skills would you recommending acquiring before maybe going into a government or national lab job? And this is very broad, but if you can maybe add a little bit more insight into this.
I would say that in your PhD, you can get really narrowed down into what you do day to day. And then like at my position, everything is at a really high level. Like I don't think about like how to make a catalyst anymore. I think about like what metrics matter for meeting cost goals for like a whole set of technologies that I didn't even really do my PhD on. So there's a lot of benefit to having skills in like working with other people and taking initiative in places that maybe you didn't have to, because there's in government like a mile long list of things that need doing that aren't getting done. And so they are encouraged to see somebody who's sort of like taking on things that no one told you to do it, but you thought it was important. And so you picked it up. And that can be pretty a beneficial thing, especially in fellowships with the Department of Energy. There isn't really like a job description of like, you're going to do these 3 things and then for like a year or 2 and then you'll stop. It's sort of a little bit of like, what do you want to do, but also what does somebody need you to do? And so you kind of just get thrown on to like whatever is at the end of someone's to-do list that they don't have time for, which can be very chaotic and scary, but it also leaves you time to do stuff that you want to do. So I noticed in my office that there was one person working on environmental justice, and it was becoming and is now a big priority of the Department of Energy. And I realized this one person was also a fellow and doing it all by herself. And I, reached out, said, can I help? And now I'm like, that's part of now my official federal position is to be a liaison to that team within my office. And so you can do things that maybe aren't part of your job description because you don't really have one, but I was interested and so I did it. And there's a lot of that in the job. So being sort of creative and doing things that are outside the box, I think is great, even if it wasn't like I published a ton of papers, because I didn't publish a ton of papers.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I think it's just important to be flexible and, kind of open-minded too, because like what Anne-Marie was saying, that if you're thinking outside the box and if you're creative, that creativity will always show through. It's very rare, and maybe it does happen, but it's not as common as you think. You will use some of the tools that you gained in grad school and in your academic career, but more than likely what's going to end up happening is you'll use those tools to grow and to develop and to learn new techniques and branch out. So, I can't say I used a lot of what I did in grad school, but I used different aspects that helped a lot. Problem solving is very important, so.
Yeah, besides all the technical skills that you learn throughout your degree, you should also emphasize the soft skills that you developed during your graduate degree, whether that's teamwork ability, and as you all mentioned, a lot of the projects that you work on you collaborate with other people. So really emphasizing those skills, your teamwork, your collaboration, problem solving, you taking the initiative to be involved with organizations or committees, things like that. Awesome. So next question that was asked in the chat was, for those of you who mentioned they're not necessarily doing the lab work or science themselves, what technical or soft skills from your PhD translated or were helpful to your current roles? And in what point in your career did you decide you wanted to pivot from doing science like you were doing in graduate school?
I'll jump on this one first. So a lot of relationship management, you might hear that a lot. Relationship management is really important, especially if you're working with a program manager to try to understand the funding announcement a bit better, or eventually once you're working with somebody like me to commercialize something, you might want to reach out to their program manager again and get approval for doing certain things. Or if you want to collaborate with folks from different labs, you want to maintain your, across the lab network to get things done. You may have an instrument that somebody else does not, and vice versa. There's also encouragement sometimes to work with other national labs to get things done. So in my world, there are these things called technology commercialization opportunities. And so a lot of the things that I do relate, we work with a bunch of national labs, a bunch. And I also, like in my role, I have to constantly be on the lookout for which inventors are creating new things that are potentially commercializable. Sometimes the science first folks might not realize that they're onto something that could be great for somebody else. Sometimes they also don't realize that some people in my space or adjacent to my space are kind of intellectual property averse. They say, why would we file a patent on this? This has to be out there for the public. And in theory, you're totally right. But in practice, if a company cannot get exclusive rights to invention A, they're super disincentivized from taking it to market, because they might do a lot of R&D to take it from tech readiness level 3, where you've produced it at a bench scale. But if somebody shows up, once they totally commit millions of dollars in R&D funding, somebody else can show up and make a generic version of it that destroys the incentive for getting the R&D done properly. So we have to explain this to our science folks and get approval. Sometimes it's really hard to get science folks to fill out certain contracts or to respond in a timely fashion. So you really want to make sure that you are managing relationships carefully. So that's what I'll throw in there, and then pass it over to I'll continue the same clockwise cycle, pass it over to Jason.
So what question are we on now? Are we still on the what are the skills you need?
No, so the question is, what technical or soft skills from your PhD?
Oh, there was a soft skills.
Yeah.
And also when did you want to pivot from grad school science to not grad school science?
Well, I think in my case, look, I left U of I thinking that I wanted an academic career, right? I'm not gonna lie. But the problem is I found out pretty soon that an FDA postdoc, a government postdoc, may not have been the best for the positions that I was looking for, okay? Now, so when that happens, I also then had to have an open mind to the opportunities that a federal career did offer. And I think that, so when I saw there was an ability to grow, to develop as a scientist, to build a group, for example, I saw really elements that really attracted me to the academic position in that job. And so that's kind of where I figured out what I wanted to do and when I wanted to stay. It wasn't by any means like one day just woke up, it kind of just happened. So a lot of it depends on your individual situation and being able to, adapt as things change to the dynamic nature that careers are. You don't know what's really going to happen tomorrow. I do think, though, that the importance of soft skills. Now, I don't know if I developed a lot of soft skills in grad school, but the soft skills that I think are important to a professional career in probably any workforce, but I just speak in the government. I think it's very important to be able to give and receive feedback. And I do think that it's very important to understand the way the organization works, because in the government at least, and I think in industry as well, there is no decision made in a vacuum. And there are several layers that have to go on. And I'll tell you right now that all of us in our jobs probably find ourselves in things that outcomes that maybe we disagree, or maybe our input wasn't fully taken. I think that one of the important things is to learn how to align, even though if you don't agree with the decision, because that's one of the things that will help you move on and forward. For example, when maybe you don't think that the correct decision was made, but it's something that in a hierarchical organization with different layers, that's something that's going to happen all the time. So I think that the resilience helps a lot for you to grow, because if you get bogged down and, well, this didn't go my way, it's going to be very hard for you to succeed. So I think those two things, but that and giving and receiving feedback.
I'll say I am grateful to my advisor because he would edit documents in front of you and like delete your paragraphs in real time. And that was like painful, but now I don't feel as guilty when I scroll through a red line document where it's just like my director has comments all over the page. Yeah, there's a lot of that in government, is because everything goes through like 4 levels of review, and someone has an opinion and they want it a certain way. And you're like, this is awful. Why would we do it this way? This is so dumb. And then you just have to like live with it and pick your battles, like decide the thing that's actually important that you want to say, no, I will not do it that way. We need to do it a different way and try to, present your best case. And other things you're just like, it's not worth it. I knew sort of at the end of grad school, I never really wanted an academic career. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did apply for a national lab postdoc because I was like, I do kind of like research more than I thought I would when I started my PhD. I'm not super attached to it. I hate wearing pants and closed-toed shoes. And that's like a requirement. And I sort of wanted to have an impact doing something. And sometimes science feels a little bit like, man, I made this one catalyst and maybe it will change the world, but probably it will just be like, the next thing in a line of very long things. So government was attractive to me because you're pulling the strings at sort of a different level, and the impact feels a little bit closer to home. And I still get to see science because I manage projects that do that kind of stuff every day. So I get to like observe it, but from afar, where I don't have to like worry about the reaction that's happening tomorrow. And I sort of was leaving grad school ready to not do research anymore. So it wasn't like a super conscious decision that I made at some point after grad school. It was sort of in my mind already.
Awesome. Thank you all. So if you aren't following the chat, some of our panelists are also answering some questions there. So be sure to look at that.
I have sorry to interrupt, but I have one more comment, because I answered the soft skill that's important, but not the moment I realized I wanted to change paths. And I have a really cool comment that I stole from somebody else. So the deputy director, or the former deputy director of SLAC, his name is Norbert Holkamp. He said the coolest thing during his farewell speech. He said that at some point during his career, he noticed he was doing good science and he enjoyed doing science, but he wasn't going to have maximum impact doing the science. He was going to have maximum impact making connections with other scientists and helping folks get things done. And so he did have a pretty good impact. You can consider it. If you Google Rubin Observatory, LSST, you'll see that SLAC is responsible for building the camera lens. It's going to go into the Rubin Observatory that's going online in Chile, I think next year. And that's a massive collaboration with like 33 plus countries and a ton of scientists. And he was pretty much the guy that made sure that that was on track. And like Emery said, focusing on what's important. How do we get the football into the goalpost or whatever? I don't watch football, so you fill in the blanks for me. But I think that's awesome. And I didn't have an overnight moment like that yet. I haven't had that epiphany yet. But the thing you're probably interested in learning is U of I has an Office of Tech Management where I was able to get an internship in, and I realized this is super cool. And pretty much every research institution around the globe has a tech transfer office, and that's how I got started. And I've really enjoyed it so far. We'll see what happens in the future.
Awesome. Thanks for putting in that comment. So some of you mentioned also doing internships. Hopefully I'll ask a little bit more about that. But another question that was in the chat that I wanted to touch on was, what was the process for obtaining your first postdoc or position in government? How did you find those opportunities or make connections with current scientists or group leaders at national labs? And you all mentioned this and touched upon this a little bit, but if anyone has anything else to add to this question.
I have a cool U of I connection. So what ended up happening at the time was the scientist at FDA was a U of I alum from the 1980s. And so when he saw that I was in the Lizzie group, and so Jim Lizzie was starting around the same time that the scientist was at U of I, the knowing of the group, knowing the reputation of the group, knowing the school and the department, it helped out a lot, because right away, and this is the same case, I'll be honest, if I see a U of I person apply for one of our positions, that gets me excited. And the reputation and the networking and the connection and just knowing, the rigors of what the department, what the School of Chemical Sciences does in preparing their students, it moves you to, oh, I want to talk to that person. So that always helps a lot. And so I want you to know that you're enrolled in a really nice, prestigious program. And that helped me out as well. So I'll just mention that.
Yeah, if I'll kind of follow that and say, similar to what Jason just said, very much the same thing happened to me. And I'll be perfectly frank about how I got into this position. So I was graduating. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I was interested in national lab work because I liked research, but I didn't want to go into academia. I also didn't want to get like pigeonholed into, developing something really, really highly specific for industry. But I applied to like a million places because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And frankly, I was pretty insecure. I was thinking, oh my God, I don't know who's going to hire me. Like, all my work is so like fundamental. It's not really aligned with any of the hot topics or anything like that. And so I applied to a bunch of places. And, I did go to the career fair, and I spoke to some people from Lawrence Livermore at the career fair, and I applied to a bunch of positions. Now, whether or not that meeting had anything to do with whether I was hired or not, I don't actually know. What happened was that, again, an alumnus from the materials science department, who graduated like maybe 5 or 6 years before me, saw my resume and said, oh, I know that group. I know what they do. Yeah, we should definitely bring this guy out to interview. And then, right, so it can be sort of a luck thing that way. And I think that definitely helped me a lot. But that's what helps you get your foot in the door. And if you read in the chat, I kind of recommended some other ways. So if your current advisor or a professor that knows you really well or you work closely with already has an existing relationship, or at least some form of connection at the institution that you're interested in, urge them to make that introduction and send over your resume and kind of put you in touch with somebody. That's right? That's always the highest barrier. So obviously you want to go in and submit your resumes to the job posting, because people really, we go over those in detail. It's not going to go overlooked. And, we don't use any algorithms that scan through keywords or anything like that. So try to make it as clear as possible and sort of human oriented rather than algorithm oriented, what you do, what you're passionate about, what you're interested in. And then I'll just kind of add to what the remainder of the process looks like. So typically, if somebody's interested, they're going to set up a phone or Zoom interview, and you can talk a little bit about your work. If you're doing that stage, just make it really, really basic. Don't go into details, like 5 slides max. Give the big picture overview of what you do, and then have lots of backups if they ask you questions. Okay, so if that goes well, you get invited for a full on-site interview, and there you're actually going to give a 45-minute seminar, and that's where you're going to want to go into detail, but also not too much detail, because your audience is going to be mixed, and so you're going to have to sort of tune it. There's no easy answer. And then you'll meet with people that you would potentially be working with, potential team members, etc. And then from there, if you do get an offer, the offer, you'll get notified, but the offer isn't official yet. It's subject to a background check, and then I think a negative drug test. And so all in all, it's very unfortunate, but for a lot of national labs, this whole process can be several months. And all I can say is, you just got to have patience. It kind of depends on how quickly the people at the lab can move in terms of scheduling your interview, how quickly your background check goes. That's also, a kind of it's a bit depressing, but don't get discouraged. Just, keep in touch with whoever your kind of host for the interview was, and keep checking in, make sure everything is progressing. Don't give up hope. But yeah, unfortunately, the national lab is not a place where you can have an interview and then at the end of the day, they just say, okay, you're hired. You're going to have to wait a little bit. And so I would advise you to kind of keep that in mind in your calculations as you're approaching graduation or whatever. So just, yeah, it can take a while. Be prepared for that.
The government also can take a while, even for a fellowship position, a federal position, forget about it. It's like, feels like 1,000 years. I think when I was a fellow, so I was already sort of in the, in the system, I applied in August or July, and I didn't start until November. So there's like the turnover is forever. The fellowship period went a little bit faster, and there's a lot of luck involved. So I would also say to apply for like as many things as you're like, maybe I fit here, and just do it, because you never know. Sometimes people have postings, right? And maybe they're checking them right now. Maybe they're not going to check them for a couple of months, and there's just no way to know which one it is. So like the best thing you can do is apply and hope. I applied for some postdocs at NREL that like nothing ever happened. And I got like I had gotten declined like a year after I applied. So presumably they had put up the posting, but didn't actually fill it for like a year. I got a postdoc offer at Argonne National Lab at the same time. And that process is sort of still the same, but it was all over Zoom. I didn't ever go on site. And I had gotten that offer while I was waiting, like the week that I was going to interview for the job that I did take, and had to be, ask like, how long before you need to know an answer? Because I'm like, have this other interview. Don't be afraid to do that. I felt very nervous about asking for that, but don't be afraid to try to get the thing that you maybe want. I'd say I put it in the chat, but fellowships are a great way to get into federal agencies, mostly because on the federal agency side, they're a lot simpler and less sort of administratively burdensome. And so it's a good way to sort of test someone out before you're in a federal position where it's harder to get out of. Basically, there generally are like 1-year probationary periods and stuff, but it's just the level of paperwork is so much more that it's really taxing if you show up and that you're not a great fit. But in a fellowship, it's a 1-year sort of renewing contract, so it's easier to see if you like it and to decide to stay or not, and sort of also on the office side. So they like to sort of pull up from fellows. I think 4 of the most recently hired federal employees in my office were fellows for some amount of time, from less than a year to like 2 years before they took their federal position. So, and that's fairly common in other offices to have fellows that convert to full-time. But also the things I put in, some of the links I put in the chat are to federal positions. And there's one in particular that's open for recent graduates, which is meant to be for people who just left. So those exist as well. It's a new thing that the Department of Energy is trying very recently. And those recent graduate positions close on March 16th. So if it's that time for you, it's time.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing all your resources, and to the student. Yeah, go ahead, Nikola.
Sorry, I'll just add one more thing, which is that, there is obviously something about how you construct your resume and your cover letter that is important. And you should rely on, Jennifer, and I think I saw Patricia join. I don't know if she's still here. Hi, Patricia. Patricia was super helpful when I was a grad student. They know what they're doing. And so just, they're such a great resource, and make sure that that you get all of their wisdom and experience, and they'll help you construct the right resume for the right position. Yeah, so make sure you do that. And one more thing I wanted to mention that I forgot, which is, at least for our lab, often the positions, the description of the work is very vague. And honestly, you're almost never going to be hired to work exactly in the area that your PhD is in. And so just apply to everything. I mean, not everything, but anything that even seems remotely connected to the type of work that you're interested in doing and are currently doing. Yeah, put yourself out there. It's up to the recruiter to decide whether or not you're a good fit. Don't limit your options. So keep that in mind always, because often they're very, very generic, and ultimately people want some kind of general skills in the same broad general area. But what we're looking for is creative problem solvers and good team players, and just dedicated, hardworking people. So just focus on that.
Awesome, great points. And as Nikola, you mentioned, you don't always need to be 100% match for a position that looks interesting to apply, right? And having that flexibility and adaptability as one of your skills will also help you succeed. So yeah, students, make sure you look at all the resources and links that have been posted in the chat. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to our alums and apply to any of those that look interesting. So a couple more questions that we had in the chat, and this one might be a little bit more targeted to Anne-Marie, but one of our students was interested to know about the gender diversity demographics comparing between government and national lab environments to academia. If you have any idea about that.
I think the federal, they survey the whole populace and publish. And I think like the Department of Energy as a whole is about 50-50, but there's pockets. So like on my sub team, so like in my office, there are 5 teams and I'm on one of them. And in my office, like I think there's more women than men, but there is another team in my office that only has 1 woman and she's a fellow and she started like 6 months ago. So it kind of depends on where you're at, and in the sort of traditional sense of like certain areas are more traditional, like have more men traditionally, right? And so there's more of them there. I think leadership is probably quite heavily skewed toward men. The director of my office is a woman, but there aren't, I would say that maybe like 25% of directors are women. Yeah, I don't know that it's like exceptionally better, but I think it's maybe a little bit better than the national lab space. Most of the national lab people I work with are men in research, like in my project management sort of interaction with the people I send funds to, which isn't great, but such is life. I like my office. I enjoy it here. I get to work with a lot of new young people because our office is growing very rapidly right now. And that's really great. But I also came from a lab. My Andrew Gorth's lab was like maybe more than 50% women now. So I sort of came from it and went to it. So it feels right.
Awesome. So we only have 5 more minutes to the end of our panel, but as I was asking before, Jose and Anne-Marie, you had mentioned about internships and getting experience while you were in your graduate careers. So could you tell us a little bit about that, about the importance of internships, if anyone is interested in doing that, how to navigate it all?
I would say you have to get your advisor to say okay, which my advisor was like, I guess it's okay, but I don't love it, was sort of the thing that I got from him. And then I tried to go find one and I was like, had no idea how to do that. I didn't know about Synflix, so I like tell everybody I see that it exists. He had also tried to set me up with this connection with someone at a national lab who he knew that worked in the same area that I was doing my PhD research in, which would have been really great, but then COVID happened. It was like the summer of 2020 was when I was trying to do this, which was just like an insane idea. So that sort of probably would have happened otherwise, but didn't. And then I had applied for an energy storage internship that was funded by the Department of Energy, but it was at a national lab. And that still happened even though it was COVID, and they just had us do it remotely, which was fascinating because they were having me do like model building in Excel, which is not something I had any experience doing or like any background in, or felt like I was like just pulling things out of the sky, basically. But I think it went really well. They ended up asking me to stay on part-time afterwards, but I couldn't do that and a PhD. I would have drowned probably. But it was a really great experience. And I also really wanted to do something that wasn't like my PhD because I was getting a little bit burnt out of this, making the same catalyst for 4 years. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I think the summer, like, I think it's best to do it after your prelim because you're sort of past the point of destruction. But before you're leaving, so sort of like summer between your 3rd and your 4th, or between your 4th and your 5th is probably a good time to do it. Yeah, just get your advisor's permission and then do it. I think it's a great way to like give your brain a break from what you're already doing. Even if it's related to what you do, it's still going to be a little bit different. And then it just expands your network into having people to like write you references and just people to be linked to. I think it's sort of equivalent as if like you could do a really big collaboration with another lab. Like if it's sort of similar to doing that, where you're just expanding what you know how to do and who you're with, and it's good for all of those reasons. And I think it maybe helped me get this job. It's again hard to know how you got the job because you didn't hire you, and I haven't participated in any interviews yet. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll just ditto that. Post prelim, ask your PI, do the internship. It's good for your career. Build those relationships early on before you're looking for a job, and it'll be a smoother conversation than, hi there, nice to meet you. Can I have a job, please? And so, do that earlier rather than later. I posted a couple things in the chat as well.
Yes, Jose did the Office of Technology Management internship when you were here. So I think they're also doing applications. So yeah, if you're interested in that, please click on the link and apply. All right, in the last couple of minutes, if our alumni, I just wanted to hear your thoughts, maybe some brief thoughts about anyone who's interested in careers in government and national labs. What advice do you have for them briefly? I know you already had a lot of advice, but brief last minute thoughts that you would want to share with students and postdocs who are here today.
I would say keep your options open, look around, cast a broad net, and probably feel free to reach out to any one of us, me, and if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Just apply for anything that you think is interesting. You never know. There's also another kind of fellowship called a AAAS fellow, but you have to have already graduated from your PhD at the time you apply. So you can't like apply before you've officially graduated, which kind of isn't great if you're like just finishing your PhD, but if you're a postdoc, it's a good idea. And it's similar in that you like work for a federal agency for like a short period. So just do whatever you want, anything that you're interested in, even if it doesn't seem like it's related to your PhD, but you did it during your PhD, it's worth like talking about, discussing, putting on your cover letter, etc.
I'll also just add, get informed about what the institution does, and attend things like this, or if there are more sort of online workshops, etc. Or just as a really simple starting point, I don't know if everybody has those, but I assume in this day and age that every institution has their own like YouTube channel. Go look at a few videos. Like, we're all stretched for time. But you can watch like a 5-minute video about something, about a national lab that you're interested in or whatever. So kind of like, or follow them on Instagram and Twitter. Like you'll get sort of little snippets of what they're doing, and that might be a good starting point to see something that you might be interested in and pursuing a career. And then totally random advice is if you are communicating with somebody via email and they don't respond to you, we get hundreds of emails a day, or at least I do. I mean, literally like more than 100. So, week by week, you follow up and be courteous and remind them like, oh, hey, still haven't heard from you. Eventually you'll shame them into responding. And I'm kind of talking about myself more than a lot of people are very good at responding immediately, but we do get swamped. So don't get discouraged.
I'll leave you with two things. One, ask a lot of questions to people that know answers. Smart folks like Patricia and Jennifer are an excellent resource, and they know what they're doing. If you're like me, and this is the second bit of advice, and you don't know what you're doing, and you're applying to something outside of your research group's field, and which, by the way, I got to highlight, I was part of the Jeff Moore group. I love my time there. I love working with Jeff, and I learned a ton, and I have a lot of Jeffisms that I think about from time to time for guidance. But if you're applying outside of your group's field, and you're pretty much cold applying like I did, look for the office you're going to be working in, find the highest ranking human there, introduce yourself, and mention that you dropped your application, and you might get a pretty good interview experience like I did where I started at Oak Ridge.
Yeah, especially for government jobs, like check whatever they tell you to do to apply, it might seem odd. It's going to be like, email this inbox and tell us your name and blah, blah, blah. Like, do all those things. It's better to do too much than too little, because you might miss a step and then your resume gets missed, because there's like, the Department of Energy is massive, right? And there's a million people applying every day to different jobs to try to get in. And so it sometimes can be hard to stand out. And if you apply for a job, send me an email so that I know to like maybe follow up with somebody, even if it's not in my office, because that sometimes is the way forward. Convoluted and complicated.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for so generously volunteering your time. A virtual round of applause for all of you. And thank you for all sharing your insights, your advice with our students, and for being willing to connect with our students. And if they're interested in applying, reaching out to you. So to all the participants, this session is recorded, and I will be sharing links to videos later on next week. But as I said, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to our alums and also to our office if you have any questions about careers in these industries. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you again, alums, for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.